Welcome on into the Wolverine.com podcast. Clayton Sayfie here, solo as your host here on the pod. We are going to run down Michigan's 2025 football schedule. This is our second straight year giving you one thing to know about each opponent. So you can take it with you on your summer, take it with you this 4th of July. Happy 4th of July to everybody out there. Make sure to like the video. If you want Michigan to go 12-0, if you want them to beat all these teams, screw these teams, right? Who cares about the one thing to know? They're going to win all these games. If you feel that way, hit the like button, subscribe to our channel as well. And we have a great deal for you over at thewolverine.com. 2 months of premium access for just $1. It gets you on the message board. It gets you behind the paywall on all of the articles. For 2 months for just $1 using the promo code UM1. That is now going to get you through fall camp. That's going to get you into Michigan football season as well. We got Big Ten Media Day in Las Vegas coming up. You're going to get all of our content from that over at thewolverine.com. All right, let's start out by running down the schedule. We're going in order here as the games will be played, and we will start August 30th against New Mexico, 7:30 p.m. on NBC at the Big House. One thing to know about the Lobos, New Mexico underwent a coaching change coming out of last season. Bronco Mendenhall comes out of retirement. Of course, he was the coach somewhat recently at Virginia. Before that was at BYU with Taysom Hill. Had a pretty good runs at both schools. Was retired, comes out of retirement to coach at New Mexico and leaves after 1 year. Kind of feel for New Mexico fans. That also led to a mass exodus to the transfer portal, as you would imagine. And now 47-year-old Jason Eck is in as their coach. He comes from Idaho, which, if you remember last season, took Boise State to the brink, took Oregon to the brink last year. They were down only 3 points with 6 minutes to play against the Ducks. So he had a really, really competitive FCS team that played well against FBS teams last season, 2-4 in his career there against the FBS. But in those 4 losses, none of them by more than 14 points. So again, competitive is a word to describe the way he had those teams playing against teams at a higher level. Now he's moving up, a ton of new. He brings some guys with him, including their quarterback from Idaho to New Mexico, so it's going to be a step up in competition for those guys, but they rank 135th nationally in ESPN's returning production metric. They had dozens of guys leave. 11 of their transfers that departed went to Power 4 schools, and the most notable being Devin Dampier, who is projected to be the starting quarterback at Utah this year, and coming off a great season, is one of the reasons why Utah has been picked as a pretty trendy selection for a lot of national people as a sleeper team in the country. So going to be a tall task for New Mexico coming in, and that is 1 week before Michigan takes on Oklahoma down in Norman. That is September 6th, 7:30 p.m. Eastern on ABC. First time in Michigan program history that they will open with 2 straight night games. And the one thing to know is somewhat of an opinion, but Brent Venables, their head coach, heading into year 4, is on the hot seat. At least it's percolating a little bit. He took over for Lincoln Riley. Now, Oklahoma had not gone under 500 in a season since 1998, and that was the last year, led to the firing of John Blake. He had a 3-year stint there. Now they've gone under 500 in 2 of 3 seasons. They had a 10-win campaign sandwich in between those 2, but the pressure is on. Now Oklahoma has high hopes coming into the season, coming off of what was a season last year. They went 6-7. They did make a bowl game, but it was very similar to Michigan's year in 2024. The offense lagged way behind. They had a pretty solid defense. They beat Alabama. They were the ones that delivered the loss that pretty much kept Alabama out of the college football playoff last season. But the offense scored only 24 points per game. That ranked 97th in the country. They switched back and forth between 2 quarterbacks. In comes a new offensive coordinator and a new quarterback. Sound familiar? Same thing going to be the case here at Michigan, Ben Arbuckle, the new offensive coordinator, he's 29 years old. He comes from Washington State. And who did he coach there as the quarterback last season? John Mateer, who's also coming from Wazoo to Oklahoma, was the top-ranked quarterback in the transfer portal this offseason. Those two work together. Arbuckle also the quarterback's coach for the Sooners now, so they have that familiarity, although they're going to have to get everyone else on the same page as well. They brought in some offensive line transfers. They lost a bunch of guys from their receiving core, which wasn't all that strong. It dealt with some injuries last season, but brought some in. And also the second most notable addition on that offense comes at running back. Jaden Ott from Cal. He was first-team All-Pac-12 in 2023, then dealt with some injuries, struggled a little bit last season. But in 23, he rushed for 1,300 yards, 12 touchdowns, averaged over 5 yards per carry. Again, first-team all-conference selection. 4 starters back on the offensive line. But as we mentioned, they brought in some transfers. That was a bad offensive line last season, so some of those guys will be replaced. Also notable on the defensive side of the ball for Oklahoma, Brent Venables, their head coach, will call the plays. He did not do that last season. Their DC leaves for the same job at West Virginia, and now Venables back in charge. Of course, he has tons of experience doing this. He was the defensive coordinator at Oklahoma when Sherrone Moore was an offensive lineman there. Brent Venables also kind of made his name more so at Clemson under Dabo Swinney as the national championship winning defensive coordinator a couple times over. So he's got experience doing it. But when you talk to people at Oklahoma, they mentioned that he's had some issues with game management, clock management, things like that. Now he's adding something else to his own plate. So that could be a challenge for him. But the big story there is, what is this offense going to be early on in the season? And when they play Michigan on September 6th, which offensive coordinator and quarterback will be up to speed quicker? Bryce Underwood and Chip Lindsey, or Ben Arbuckle and John Mateer? Now, it's important to mention Mateer is coming off an unbelievable season at Washington State, completed 64.6% of his passes, over 3,100 yards, 29 touchdowns, 826 rushing yards, 15 touchdowns on the ground. He threw 7 picks, and I mean, he's a fun watch. He completed less than 50% of his passes in 2 games against power conference teams last season. Remember, Washington State no longer a power conference team, but there's some talent there that he may be able to unlock at this new level. But it could be an adjustment, and he's going against Wink Martindale, so we'll see how he fares in that second game of the year after they play Illinois State to open the year. So both teams with cupcake openers, and then they'll have that showdown game at night on September 6th. Let's move on to Central Michigan. This game, September 13th, noon Eastern on Big Ten Network. Back to basics after the 2 straight night games. You get a noon game. And Central Michigan also undergoing a coaching change this offseason. Matt Drinkle takes over for Jim McElwain, who retired after going 4-8 a year ago. Drinkle was the offensive line coach at Army from 2019 to 24. He helped their O-line win the Joe Moore Award last season. Impressive to do so at a service academy. 6 starters are back on defense. They did lose some offensive players to the portal, but 6 starters back on defense, so could be a solid group in the MAC there. But Joe Labas is the projected starter at quarterback. He started 6 games to begin last season, then suffered a season-ending injury, but he did struggle even when he was healthy. 58.8 completion percentage, 1,100 yards, 7 touchdowns, 7 picks. He entered the portal in December, but was convinced to come back to Mount Pleasant by the new coaching staff. Michigan is 4-0 all-time against Central Michigan. All those games were very lopsided in the Wolverines' favor. The last meeting was August 31, 2013, 59-9 win for Michigan under Brady Hoke. So somewhat expecting something similar there. Michigan's 2 games against group of 5 opponents, have new coaching staffs, have a bunch of roster turnover. So it's going to be tough for them to come in, especially early in the year in September, to the Big House. September 20th at Nebraska. And of course, it's on the table, and don't want to mention it too much because we're talking more about the opponents, but Michigan could be without Sherrone Moore in the game against Central Michigan, in the game at Nebraska on September 20th. which will be 3:30 p.m. Eastern on CBS. The one thing to note, Nebraska really got some help for quarterback Dylan Raiola this offseason. He had a solid year for a true freshman quarterback, 67.1 completion percentage, 2,800 yards through the air, 13 touchdowns, 11 picks. Would like that ratio a little bit higher if you're a Nebraska coach or fan. But the offensive line, the wide receiving core, somewhat subpar last season. They boosted both of those groups through the transfer portal. A couple offensive line additions that really stand out. Elijah Pritchett is an offensive line transfer from Alabama. Looks like the starter at left tackle. He's opened 11 career games. And then Notre Dame transfer Rocco Spindler at right guard. Michigan pursuing him a little bit out of the portal as well. Started 23 games in South Bend. But as I mentioned, the receiving core, much better. Ja'Cory Barney Jr. had 55 catches for 447 yards last year. He was Nebraska's third leading receiver. He's back, but he's joined by Kentucky transfer Dane Key, who has racked up over 1,800 yards, in 14 touchdowns in 38 career games. And then former Cal wideout Naziah Hunter, 40 catches, 578 yards, 5 touchdowns as just a freshman last season in the ACC, crazy enough, for California. Heinrich Harburg, if you remember him, started against Michigan at quarterback in 2023, is, he converted it to a tight end now. Apparently one of the faster players on that team. But a major storyline in terms of, away from just the players coming into this season, you have 3 new coordinators on Matt Rule's staff at Nebraska. Dana Holgorsen was brought in last year. Remember, the former West Virginia and Houston head coach, brought in mid-season as an offensive consultant. And then by late November, that he was promoted to the offensive coordinator job. They fired Marcus Satterfield. Holgorsen now with a full offseason to actually work with Dylan Raiola and these players. He's there. Defensive coordinator Tony White leaves for Florida State. They promote Mike Eckler. They promote John Butler, who was the defensive backs coach. And then the special teams coordinator, Mike Eckler, comes in to lead a unit that had 10 kicks or punts, blocked last season. I may have to read it again because it's such a ridiculous stat. So he's got his work cut out for him on the special teams unit for Nebraska, but a big question mark for them, defensive line. They lose Ty Robinson, big number 9, who was there for 60 games as a Cornhusker. He goes in the 4th round to the Eagles, but they're trying to figure out the defensive line, it seems like, coming into the season. Let's move on to October 4th against Wisconsin, coming off of the first of 2 byes for Michigan this coming season. This game at the Big House, noon or 3:30, still TBD. TV is also to be announced, but noon or 3:30 at Michigan Stadium. One thing to know about the Badgers, Luke Fickell has gone 12-13 in his 2 full seasons at Wisconsin, and they missed a bowl game last year for the first time since 2001. Kind of in a similar spot to Brent Venables at Oklahoma. Luke Fickell received a 1-year contract extension back in February that puts him under contract through the 2031 season. But then you look back and realize Wisconsin does this to all their coaches, 1-year extension almost every year. Paul Chryst, his predecessor, received a contract extension before the 2022 season and then was fired 5 games in. Not saying that's going to happen to Luke Fickell, but important to note that the pressure's on there. And with the pressure on, he makes a move at the offensive coordinator spot, replaces Phil Longo with Jeff Grimes. Longo, of course, brought in the air raid system to Wisconsin, which just never worked. And in hindsight, was really never going to work at a place like Wisconsin. And Jeff Grimes, a 2-time Broyles Award finalist, much more traditional offensive scheme, comes from Kansas, really had good offenses there at Kansas. And Lance Leipold, a very strong offensive mind. So they're getting back to basics there in Madison. They bring in a quarterback with starting experience in the Big Ten, Billy Edwards Jr. Remember, Michigan pursued him a little bit in the transfer portal as well back in December before they landed Mikey Keene. He was the starter at Maryland a year ago, completed 65% of his passes for 2,881 yards, 15 touchdowns with 9 picks. Also can run a little bit, kind of a rugged type of player. So he could have a little bit more success potentially at Wisconsin, or at least a similar amount, which I think could help that team, considering just how rough it's been offensively for Wisconsin. Second leading rusher, Darian Dupree, is back. Their second leading receiver, Vinny Anthony, is back. The defense last year was abysmal against the run. They ranked 91st in the country, allowing 165 rushing yards per game. That's the most rushing yards per game they've given up since 2005. So they did do some work in the transfer portal at defensive tackle. We'll see if that pays off for them. But this is a pivotal season for Wisconsin and a brutal schedule. You would have much rather have an easier schedule. They play Michigan, Ohio State, Oregon, Alabama, Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana. So if you're on the hot seat, that's not exactly the schedule that you would draw up if you're Luke Fickell, but maybe he gets a little bit of grace for that. We'll see, but it's going to be a gauntlet for them. October 11th at USC, time TBA, and the time is TBA for the rest of the games on Michigan's schedule now until Ohio State. That is noon on Fox. We'll talk about that later on. Lincoln Riley has his next quarterback. Miller Moss last year, kind of an up and down season. Thought he might have gotten scapegoated a little bit by what the situation was with a team that wasn't winning. Lincoln Riley makes a move. Jaden Maiava starts the last 4 games of the season. They go 3-1 to their credit. The loss was to Notre Dame. Miller Moss, by the way, transfers to Louisville under Jeff Brom. Extremely quarterback-friendly system. Should have a good year there, and really maybe could have been a better option this season. But Maiava, with more eligibility left, you're kind of seeing that throughout the country where one guy's going to leave and the coaches choose the younger player that could maybe have a little bit more upside or start for them for multiple years. Maiava completed 59.8% of his passes for 1,201 yards, 11 touchdowns, 6 picks in 7 games last year. Also rushed for 4 touchdowns. They lost some receiver talent. Zachariah Branch goes to Georgia. One of my favorite players in the country, as podcast listeners know. We talked about him a lot USC week last year, but they still have a ton of receiver talent, as you would expect from a Lincoln Riley team. Mekhi Lemon, 52 catches, 764 yards, 3 touchdowns last season. Jacoby Lane, big body, red zone type of threat, 43 catches, 525 yards, 12 touchdowns a year ago. So some big targets for Maiava to work with. They're still trending in the right direction. Defensively, the storyline coming into the year last year was Danton Lynn coming over from crosstown rival UCLA to USC, and the defense did improve. They go from 121st in scoring defense in 2023 to 56th in 2024. So a big jump, 24.1 points per game. And that is Lincoln Riley's second best finish in scoring defense since he became a head coach in 2017. So he, no matter who the coordinator was, whether it was Alex Grinch or somebody else, he hadn't really figured out defense until last season, getting better. And by the way, in a more competitive conference in the Big Ten. So credit to Dan Lynn, who is by all accounts a great defensive coordinator, great track record, and also runs a very similar system to Michigan. Of course, worked with Wink Martindale at the Baltimore Ravens in the past, so they have that same system going. But going to be a challenge for Michigan going out west. They've lost, 5 straight games against either Pac-12 or former Pac-12 opponents on the road in the regular season. The last win in those set of circumstances coming at UCLA in 1989, and Michigan needs an onside kick and then, I believe a game-winning kick as well to win that game. So it's not easy typically going out there. Of course, last year they go to Washington and lose that game. And speaking of Washington, October 18th, they will come to town to the Big House. And my one thing to know about them, this is another opinion, so maybe one thing to know is my opinion, not necessarily a fact. But I think this team's flying under the radar. Damon Williams Jr. is a breakout candidate in the Big Ten at quarterback. Just 5'11", 190 pounds. You saw him last year in that game against Michigan. Small but shifty. He's got a good arm. They trusted him to throw when he came in last year, and he came in, I think, in every game. He was too good to keep off the field as a freshman, comes with Jedd Fisch from Arizona, where he was signed to Washington, was the backup to Will Rogers, but by the end of the year becomes the starter, and maybe a scapegoat situation there too as well. But the fact that he was entrusted to play throughout the season, I think spoke volumes. And what does he do in the bowl game when he gets a chance to start in that one? The Sun Bowl, they lose 35-34 to Louisville. He completed 26 of his 32 throws for 375 yards and 4 touchdowns with 1 interception. Also rushed for 48 yards and a touchdown. I think he's a stud. And the offensive line was a concern last year. They've brought in some help there. They bring in Kansas State transfer Carver Willis, who was one of the more sought-after offensive linemen in the portal this offseason. 6'5", 291 pounds. Started career 18 games in his career. He had 54 schools reach out to him while he was in the portal. Honorable mention, all Big 12 performer back in 2023, not last season, but 2 years ago. Running back Jonah Coleman's back, 5'9", 228 pounds, averaged 5.5 yards per carry last season, had over 1,000 yards. Denzel Boston at wide receiver coming off a really good season. He led the team with 9 touchdown catches, had 63 receptions, 834 yards. The quarterback, running back, wide receiver trio, is really, really good for Washington. And you couple that with Jedd Fisch, who calls the plays as the head coach, and is a really great offensive mind. I like that. And then the defensive side of the ball, they check a lot of boxes too. So Steve Belichick was the D coordinator last season. He leaves for North Carolina to become the defensive coordinator under his dad, Bill Belichick. Not much news coming out of Chapel Hill this offseason. But what does Jedd Fisch do? He replaces Steve Belichick with Ryan Walters, who, as listeners of the podcast know, is kind of a punching bag on this show. But that was because he had a couple rough years at Purdue. He had some weird comments about sign stealing back in 2023. And if you're going to do that, we're going to have to come after you a little bit when you win, I think 1 game last season. Did they go 1-11 at Purdue? I believe so. So as much as he did not have a good stint as a head coach, he's a good defensive coordinator. Illinois in 2022, they had the number 1 scoring defense in the country. Now, they were in the Big Ten West. You don't play too many great offenses. But still, they gave Michigan some troubles. I know Michigan was banged up in that game, but gave them some issues. They had some legitimate talent that he recruited there. Devin Witherspoon was one of their corners, who is now a standout in the NFL. That was a great defense. And Ryan Walters is capable. So I like their offensive play caller. I like what their defensive play caller brings. I don't know if I like him. I like their quarterback, running back, wide receiver, potentially improved offensive line, some decent personnel coming back on defense as well. Washington, they're a wild card team like a lot of these teams on Michigan's schedule, but they could be a formidable opponent and really one that could sneak up on somebody this year. They're probably going to notch an upset victory at some point. If you're a Michigan fan, you hope it doesn't come at the Big House. They do play Ohio State in kind of a weird spot. I believe a Friday night against the Buckeyes, coming off a tough game for Ohio State in Seattle. So that could be a difficult one. But I like this team to maybe upset somebody, maybe overperform here in the Big Ten this season, their second year in the conference. Let's move on to October 25th at Michigan State. And I think Aiden Childs, their quarterback, who's a junior this season, is one of the more important quarterbacks in the Big Ten for his team. I don't think he's the best. I don't think the team's going to be that good. But I think how he performs, how good he ends up being, what kind of steps he took is going to go a long way towards determining what this Michigan State team is this season. Haven't made a bowl game since 2021. They have 11 seasons under 500 in the last 25 years. Recruiting has not been maybe what you would like if you're a Michigan State fan so far under Jonathan Smith. But you do have a good quarterback, and you have some other talented players that we'll talk about in a second. But Aiden Childs cleaned up the turnovers a little bit more towards the end of last season. Overall for the year, had 16 turnovers, 11 picks, 5 lost fumbles, was careless early on in the season. But only 4 of those turnovers came in the last 6 games, took much better care of the football, completed 59.4% of his passes, 2,415 yards, and 13 touchdowns. So he'll make some dazzling plays. He'll run around. He'll make something out of nothing, and then he'll also turn it over, make the big mistake, make the turnover in the red zone, that sort of thing that you can't have. But he was in his first season as a starter, and a lot of guys make big jumps in their second year behind center as the full-time guy. By the way, he's got one of the better receivers in the Big Ten on his roster, so that's going to help. Nick Marsh, coming into his sophomore season, has All-America type potential, 6'3", 201 pounds, out of Detroit. He had some monster games last year, 194 yards against Maryland, 113 yards in that big win they had over Iowa before they – and that was when Michigan State kind of looked like they were turning a corner. Then they lose 3 straight and kind of dashed their hopes for bowl eligibility. Michigan hands them that first of 3 losses. And then end of the year, they had another chance, bowl eligibility. They get routed at their home stadium to Rutgers. Defensive side of the ball, Joe Rossi, in his second year as the coordinator there, has a lot of experience as a coordinator in the Big Ten. He has a couple really good safeties coming back. Nakai Martinez, Malik Spencer, both back. But the numbers that stood out to me about their defense a year ago were just the lack of disruption. 104th nationally with 1.6 sacks per game. They forced only 11 turnovers, ranked 115th in the country in average turnover margin per game. That's minus 0.67, so negative 0.67. The offense contributes to that, but the defense didn't get them the football back either. So they're going to have to improve on some of that. If you're not going to have an overly talented roster, you're going to need the defense to maybe come up with some more big plays to put that offense in some good spots. November 1, Purdue comes to Michigan. Frankly, one of the easier games on Michigan's schedule, given a couple numbers that we'll throw out here. And the one thing to know is that they gained and lost over 50 transfers this offseason. Kind of unheard of. I'm sure it's happened to some other programs that maybe we're not as familiar with. But they make a good hire, I think, this offseason. Barry Odom comes in for Ryan Walters. He had UNLV in the mix for a college football playoff spot last season. They lost to Boise State, who ended up making the playoff in the Mountain West Championship game. They won 10 games. But and he rebuilt UNLV. UNLV had made 1 bowl game this century before he arrived. That was in 2013. And he leads them to 2 straight bowl games. They had never been ranked in the AP or the CFP poll before entering the top 20 in each of the last the top 20 in each of those polls last season. So he can turn a program around at the group of 5 level. But when you're in the Big Ten and you're recruiting against some really other beast recruiting programs, it's going to be a challenge, especially right away. You gain 50 transfers. He had no choice but to bring a bunch of guys in. They returned just 1 starter on offense or defense out of those 22 possibilities. Just 1. That is running back Devin Maccabee, a former walk-on who's been around forever, was their starting running back in 2022 in the Big Ten championship game against Michigan. 12 of Purdue's 22 offense or defensive starters transferred to other Power 4 teams. So perhaps some talent, maybe not. We'll see how those guys fare. I won't be paying too close attention to it, but a bunch of those guys now moved on. Ryan Brown is the projected starter at quarterback. He transferred to North Carolina, spent a spring there, transferred back. We've seen that a little bit. Did the Amorian Walker from last year. Now Amorian Walker gone from Michigan, of course, as well. But if you guys remember this, the week before Michigan played Illinois, Purdue did. And Illinois is in complete control of that game. Purdue comes storming back. Ryan Brown starts to go off. 297 yards, 3 touchdowns. And then he also rushed for 118 yards. He forces that thing to overtime, and they lose 50-49. But he opened a couple games last year. He has a little bit of experience, dual threat guy. Makes them a little frisky, makes them kind of fun to watch potentially, but I don't know about what's around him. Breon Ishmael, Michigan edge transfer at Purdue now, could be in the mix for a starting job. So don't blame him for leaving, and will be interesting to see if he gets some run in November when they come to the big house. But new coordinator for them as well. UNLV had some good defenses under Mike Sherrone, who comes with Barry Odom over to Purdue. November 15th, opening day of rifle season, deer hunting in the state of Michigan. But a lot of Michigan fans will leave the state, head to Wrigley Field where this game will be played. It's technically a Northwestern home game, but I'm expecting more Michigan fans than Northwestern. I would maybe expect that regardless of where it was played in terms of a potential Northwestern home field. Michigan coming off their second of 2 byes of the season. One thing to know about the Wildcats, they bring in a transfer quarterback, Preston Stone, from SMU, who was the backup on that SMU team that made the college football playoff last season. But in 2023, he was the starter. He opened 12 games, completed 60% of his passes for over 3,100 yards, 28 touchdowns, 6 picks, rushed for 4 touchdowns, nearly 200 rushing yards as well. He led SMU to the American Athletic Conference championship game, broke his leg late that year, lost the starting job to Kelvin Jennings, who I think threw, 2 pick sixes against Penn State in that playoff game. Maybe they should have gone to Preston Stone if he was available. Not sure if he was in the portal, but he's now at Northwestern, which had a terrible offense last season. They need to inject some life into it, and he will be a big part of that. They ranked 128th nationally by averaging 17.8 points per game last season, 123rd in the country in rushing, 111th in passing. They had only 131 plays of 10-plus yards. That was 124th in the country. No explosion, no real consistent production. Michigan dominates them a year ago. Hung tough a little bit with Ohio State, more so due to their defense. But David Braun, kind of in an interesting spot, wins 9 games in his first year, one of the more improbable 9-win seasons in Big Ten history because he took over in the middle of the summer after Pat Fitzgerald was fired. Then they come back down to life a little bit. They go 4-8 overall, 2-7 in the Big Ten last season. Their defense was solid, as we mentioned. They checked in 56 in the country in total defense. That really good in the red zone, 54% touchdown percentage there for opponents, which is a really good defensive number. They have their DC back and their leading tackler back, Mac Uline, who is a redshirt junior middle linebacker. All right, November 22nd, the penultimate game of the regular season. The lead-in, it's often Maryland. It was a couple years ago when Michigan went to Maryland and got its 1,000th victory. One thing to know about the Terrapins, life after Talia Tagovailoa has not gone all that well for head coach Mike Locksley. They go 4-8 a year ago. And there's that element of Maryland when they had Talia Tagovailoa that they were just this dangerous team because they always seem to have pretty good wide receivers. And when they had a quarterback who could sling it around the yard, they were somewhat dangerous. They could put a scare into you like they did to Michigan in 2022, like they did to Ohio State in 2023, and like they did to Michigan in 2023. They almost win that game in front of a lot of Michigan fans out in College Park too. Michigan fans could take over that one. So makes it interesting. The last 2 road trips of the year, you're going to have a lot of Michigan fans in the building, probably more so for Northwestern than Maryland, but still not that tough of environments that Michigan will head into in November. Maryland's got a 3-headed race for the starting quarterback job right now, 3 different contenders. They have some receivers that got drafted to the NFL, lose some juice at that position. 2 starters back on the offensive line. New coordinators on each side of the ball. One of them familiar name, Pep Hamilton, former Michigan OC, the offense, and Ted Monachino on defense. He coached with Wink Martindale at the Baltimore Ravens. He's been working with pass rushers his entire career. And by the way, they had 1.2 sacks per game last season. So he's got those are rookie numbers. He's got to get those numbers up. Junior cornerback Dante Joyner is probably the most notable name on the entire team. Played at Arkansas State last year, had a big season, was one of the more pursued corners in the transfer portal this past year. Of course, had an interception against Michigan at the Big House against Davis Warren last season. Now let's move on to the game. Could be 11-0 against 11-0. We'll see. Both teams with challenging schedules. Ohio State play Texas week 1. So we'll see if each team is undefeated. But going to be a lot on the line in this one. Noon Eastern on Fox. One thing to know about Ohio State, in a similar spot to Michigan coming into last season, you win the national championship. You wouldn't trade it for anything, but it does mean that there's some fallout from that, not in a bad way, but you lose coordinators, you lose a bunch of players to the pros. You have to kind of figure out how new guys are going to try to do the same thing as guys that are no longer there did. New coordinators on each side of the ball, as we mentioned. Really, really interesting hires. Brian Hartline on offense, Matt Patricia on defense. We'll start with Brian Hartline. You guys remember Brian Hartline. I think our producer Megan has a video that is queued up here of Brian Hartline. You guys remember this guy.
165 days since that godforsaken day in Teal North. For 365 days, we've heard them talk. For 365 days, I have to watch them attack our head coach, attack our quarterback, and attack Buckeye Nation. Instead of getting loud and trying to respond on social media, we got quiet. We circled a date on the calendar, November 26th, 2022. And we went to work. We went to work. And we knew what we did in the dark, what we did in the quiet will someday come to light. Today is that light.
So there you go. That's Brian Hartline, just in case people forgot. Has been there a long time, has recruited incredible wide receivers, has been a big part of their offensive success. I'm giving him a hard time, but just an embarrassing speech heading into Michigan's blowout win in Columbus back in 2022. So he's in charge of the offense after Chip Kelly goes and joins Pete Carroll as the offensive coordinator of the Las Vegas Raiders. Matt Patricia, there's probably a video out there I should play of Matt Patricia too. The former Detroit Lions head coach, former New England Patriots defensive coordinator, former rocket scientist, literally as well, comes in as the DC. And we've seen how this can work. Similar spot to Michigan, right? A year ago, Michigan brings in a defensive coordinator from the NFL, some growing pains throughout the year with some high-end talent, which Ohio State also has this season. But by the end of the season, it works out. We'll see. The thing is, Michigan's going to be getting probably the best version, as long as they stay healthy, of whatever this Ohio State defense is in Week 12. But as far as the opponent as a whole, we'll see how that defense adjusts to playing a similar style from what I've read to what they had under Jim Knowles, but also with a new guy calling the plays. Another thing to know about Ohio State, I think they have the two best players in the Big Ten. Jeremiah Smith at wide receiver and Caleb Downs at safety. Jeremiah Smith set every freshman wide receiver record at Ohio State last year, 76 catches for 1,315 yards, 15 touchdowns. He was a first-team All-American as a true freshman, according to USA Today. Caleb Downs was third on the team, 81 tackles last year, 7.5 tackles for loss, 6 pass breakups, 2 picks. He's all over the field defensively. We saw it, he's 0-2 against Michigan because he played at Alabama as a freshman, Ohio State last year, but is an unbelievable player and is a great building block for them defensively after they lose all that talent that came from a unit that led the country in points allowed per game, led the country in yards allowed per game. And that was with their insanely difficult schedule if you stack it up against anyone else, because they played, 3-4 college football playoff games plus their Big Ten slate that included Michigan, Penn State, Oregon. So Caleb Downs, they still have a lot of talent there. Sonny Styles as well, second team All Big Ten at linebacker. Back to the offense, 2 starters back on the O-line, have to replace both running backs, Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, and have to replace Will Howard at quarterback. Looks like Julian Sayin, who transferred from Alabama a year ago, spent the year with Ohio State, is the likely starter. Ryan Day has been non-committal about that, hasn't named a starter. But he's got Jeremiah Smith to throw to. He's got Carnell Tate to throw to. He's got Max Clare coming in as a tight end transfer from Purdue, 51 catches, 685 yards, 4 touchdowns last year. So he's got weapons. They've got some talent on the O-line. They got to shift some things around there. And they should have a pretty good defense again, depending on what Matt Patricia can do with that unit. I wouldn't expect them to struggle like Michigan did a year ago at the beginning of the season. I think Ohio State has much more talent. They've recruited at a better level. Plus, they have those high-end guys that we mentioned, similar to what Michigan had with Mason Graham, Will Johnson, Kenneth Grant, Colston Loveland last season. Josiah Stewart, throw him in there as well. They still have that type of talent too. So, but starting the season against Texas in Columbus will be a challenge. At the end of the year, they will end it with a game against Michigan. Michigan seeking a 5-game win streak in the rivalry for the first time since a 6-game span from 1922 to 1927. So I guess we'll close it out by saying, give us a comment. What's your prediction for the Michigan-Ohio State game? If you think Michigan's going to win, hit that thumbs up button. We need to get this to 300 likes. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. And for much, much more on Michigan football, including in a couple weeks, Big Ten Media Days, fall camp coming up, beginning of the season, get in over at thewolverine.com. Use the promo code UM1 for 2 months of premium access for just $1. Have a great 4th of July, everyone, and we will see you next time.